Namaste. Amen and blessed be. At our national gathering of the Unitarian Universalist Association way back in 2012, delegates from across the country chose the topic of reproductive justice as our study action issue. And this year, at this coming General Assembly, delegates from across the country will vote on a statement of conscience on the issue of reproductive justice. It hasn't been at the forefront of our agenda at Tapestry. Every once in a while, very rarely, I'll hear it in conversations. But I wanted to talk about it today as a reminder of our connections to the wider Unitarian Universalist movement. And next week, we'll hear a little bit more about General Assembly and how you can be a part of that national dialogue and a dialogue on other important topics to us. So reproductive justice, I already see a few confused faces, isn't a phrase that you hear very often. It's a multifaceted movement. It's about empowering every person to make decisions about their own sexual well-being, and women having the resources to choose how and when they will birth children. Reproductive justice means having awareness and courage to say yes to the sex that you want and no to the sex that you don't want. It's about providing accurate and helpful information about sexuality to our young people and to our older people. It's got a local component, including honoring the diverse families that make up our congregation and offering sexuality education to our children and youth. And it has a much broader global component with questions like environmental impact of population growth and other issues. It's a hugely broad topic. So I'm actually, at a personal level, anxious to hear what the UUA comes with as their statement. We've taken stands on some of these issues over the years as a tradition. We've spoken out most strongly for the access to safe and legal abortions. The annual meetings that I mentioned before, the General Assembly passed a resolution in support of choice in 1963, 1968, 1973, 1975, 1980, 85, 87, and 93. I can assure you that getting thousands, literally thousands, of Unitarians to agree on a written document about an ethical issue is a huge undertaking. This should be some indication of the priority that this has been for our community for a very long time. Now, I usually steer clear of discussions of reproductive justice. The biggest cause for that silence is that I have a pretty personal understanding of multiple sides of the issue. Now, I've mentioned a few times in sermons that I was adopted right after I was born. What I haven't been so clear about is that my birth mother was a high school student when I was born. Neither she nor her family had the means to take care of a baby, and adoption was the right decision for them. Part of that choice, though, was likely that abortion was legally not available at that time, and part of that choice was her Southern Baptist faith. A few years later, a slightly different religious perspective could have made a very different story for her life and for mine. Now, playing a game of what-ifs makes for very, very sloppy ethics. I know that. And making rules for everyone else based only on your own particular experience is short-sighted. Still, I can't unknow the fact that under slightly different circumstances, abortion might have been the right choice. Now, my complicated perspective doesn't end there. The possibility of having children myself exposes even more sides of this ethical Rubik's Cube. For years, I thought that the only sort of responsible way to do that would be through adoption or foster parenting. But more recently, as I've come to understand the really powerful connection of a genetic link, I've come to understand the deep desire to have children that share your DNA. I've come to understand the great length that many people go through to birth children rather than adopt them. Now, I don't often dive into conversations about reproductive justice because they're complicated. I can personally understand a lot of different perspectives on the issue. But I'm not alone. I'm not the only one whose personal experience shapes their opinions. Each of you were born and raised in a particular way by a particular group of people. Some of you have children, some of you don't. You have friends who have had children and friends who haven't. And whether you know it or not, you're almost certain to know a woman who has terminated a pregnancy. And probably people who have been involved in adoption. Each of those experiences has impacted your perspective on what is right. It's unwise to make rules for other people based on your own experiences. But we also can't unknow what we have been through. Our experiences shape our opinions, and so does our faith. We bring our faith and values with us into this struggle. Some of us are very reluctant to do that. But I recently read a story about just that. A woman, Reverend Lisa Sargent, worked for Planned Parenthood before she entered the ministry. It was hard but rewarding work, she says. Frequently, when she arrived at work, I think we have all seen footage of this, the building would be surrounded by protesters. They were usually holding signs or offering religious messages and forgiveness through Jesus, if only she would reject the work that she was doing. It was hard. But one day, Lisa came across a bumper sticker that gave her some solace and courage. In the midst of all that religious force, she found a bumper sticker that said, "I'm pro-choice and I pray." So she hung it up in her workplace, and within 15 minutes, a coworker was there to talk to her about it. She whispered, "Do you really pray?" Yes, I do." "So do I," she said. And they had a powerful moment affirming their work at Planned Parenthood as people of faith. And the day continued with a near continuous stream of co-workers who wanted to talk about this simple bumper sticker, "I'm pro-choice and I pray." Reverend Lisa writes, "I learned that day that my colleagues weren't working at Planned Parenthood despite their religious beliefs, but because of them." In fact, it was working for Planned Parenthood that led Lisa into the ministry several years later, because working in that environment, she saw the role that prayer and meditation played for women in this difficult decision. She saw the need for a religious voice that supported rather than shamed people in their time of need. So like Lisa, those brave Planned Parenthood employees, we approach this issue of reproductive justice not in spite of our faith, but because of it. Rather than talk about politics of reproductive freedom, I want to focus a little bit about what our faith brings to the table. I want to explore how some of our Unitarian Universalist beliefs inform our perspective. Probably more than anything else, we believe that every soul is sacred and worthy. We believe that our bodies are good, they're not sinful. Our bodies are not dirty or distracting or irrelevant even. We believe that our bodies are beautiful. They teach us about our world and they connect us with one another, and our minds and moral capacity are just as amazing. We believe that when good information is available, good people can make good decisions about what's right for their own body. And this is how we invest in the health and well-being of young Unitarian Universalists. We provide good information about sex way beyond the basics of physical health. And we try to create a real opportunity to discuss decision-making and issues of self-worth. And frankly, I think we owe it to them to have real conversations about the hyper-sexualized world that they've grown up in. In advertisements and television and movies and magazines and music, everywhere they turn, sex is promoted as the mechanism for self-worth and intimacy. And then there's the internet. You may not know this, but you should as an ethical decision maker in our world. Anyone who has access to a computer and the ability to use it, let's say anyone above the age of 12 years old, maybe younger now, has access to a virtually endless supply of pornography. To be totally clear, I'm saying anyone with access to a computer can find an endless supply of graphic pornography. This is the world our children are coming of age in. And we have to respond to it. If we can't shield them from it, then we at least owe them an opportunity to make sense of it. It's not that sex is dirty. It's not that our kids are ill-inclined. That's not the point. The issue is that we love and respect our youth, and we owe it to them and to everyone else to have the tools to make sense of this hyper-sexualized world that we swim in. Every soul is sacred and worthy, and everyone deserves the opportunity to develop into a sexually healthy adult. But youth aren't the only vulnerable folks in this regard. Around the world and in our own country, women remain disempowered in pretty significant ways. Still, many women are regularly coerced into having unprotected sex, not as prostitutes, not as rape, just by living in a patriarchal culture. Affirming the worth of all people and helping to empower the historically marginalized means helping them to take charge of their reproductive choices. Every soul is sacred and worthy, and every person is entitled to decide if they want to have sex and how they want to protect themselves from pregnancy or STDs. And there are two other groups of people whose worth and dignity hang in the balance. The first one is women who struggle with unintended pregnancies. The religious right is quick to mention the rights of fetuses and embryos. And I, as I indicated earlier, share a deep concern for those potential lives. But the key word in that sentence is potential. Yes, there is potential for those cells, those fetuses, to develop into meaningful lives. But the women who carry them are already in the midst of a meaningful life. They have careers and school to handle. They have pressures from family and society. Every soul is sacred and worthy, and that includes the brave women who have faced the very difficult decision to have an abortion, and the countless women who in the future will need to exercise that same right. Finally, when I say that every soul is sacred and worthy, I speak also of children who are born every day to mothers and fathers who are unable to care for them. The fortunate ones, like myself and some of the kids in this congregation, get adopted into loving, supportive families. It's a fairy tale. Even that fairy tale has its hidden monsters, but it's a pretty amazing fairy tale. Other children, though, get left behind in a foster care system that's overwhelmed and underfunded. In the United States right now, there are roughly 400,000 children living in the foster care system. Every soul is sacred and worthy. Every child born into this world is entitled to a safe and loving home environment. But our society is not equipped to provide homes for many children who are in desperate need. And from what I can understand, it's not just to force women with unintended pregnancies to risk their health, their careers, their social stability to deliver one more child into that sea of need. So I've talked a lot about every soul being sacred and worthy. We also believe in a web, a unity that makes us one. Beyond all of our differences that appear to divide us, our fates are interconnected. What affects one person invariably affects a much broader web. Abortion is not a bizarre or rare thing. It's just silent. It's a very hard thing. But the women that we know and love face this difficult reality with bravery and with courage. While I was preparing for this sermon, I ran across a short film called The Abortion Diaries. I will probably put a link to it on our Facebook page. It's a collection of interviews with women from different backgrounds who have had an abortion. And they share candidly what that experience was like. And they break the silence and support one another. Now, as a man, I found it incredibly insightful. And I think it could be helpful to anyone. Whether you've dealt with it personally or not, there's a unity that makes us one. Abortion is a reality that impacts the well-being of women that we care about. And therefore, it affects us all. There's a unity that makes us one. That means that this conversation and the struggle for reproductive justice is not for women to engage alone. We're all implicated by this issue. Saying that this struggle is for women alone is like saying it's up to people of color to end racism. And I know it is precarious to say that men have a voice in this discussion. I've heard from some women, and I've read many, many different places, that the only people who should be deciding about matters of abortion are women. And I understand that inclination. I promise you I do. But I also understand that we work together to create change. There's a unity that makes us one, a unity that calls us to listen deeply and work together while we bring more justice into our world. As I suggested earlier, this topic of reproductive justice is huge. It's super broad and super varied. But I want to close with an invitation to you to keep the conversation going. Now, we can't respond to every single social justice issue. There's not enough time in the day. But please remember that reproductive justice is a real issue in our midst. Now, the simplest way we can respond is by honoring the diversity of the families in our midst, in our very own community. Each one of us lives in a network of relationships that make us who we are. Each one of us has a family of some sort. Some are very conventional. Some are more complicated amalgamations of relationships. Some are stories of pure joy. Others are hard-won arrangements. But we honor each of those stories and the difficult decisions along the way. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that right now, Tapestry is offering Our Whole Lives sexuality education to our 7th, 8th, and 9th graders. This is a huge undertaking. There are 25 sessions of this curriculum, each one lasting 1 to 2 hours. So the youth who are attending, the parents who are driving them around, and the adult teachers all deserve some serious thanks. So thank you, Jay, there you are, Lickfoot, for Scott Noonan back in the back, and Marcia Medina for your volunteer time to make this happen. And as the name suggests, Our Whole Lives is a curriculum with classes for all age groups. At some point in the coming year, we hope to offer a few classes for the adult curriculum. So keep an eye out. It's a great way to engage this conversation of reproductive justice and to learn more about yourself and about your partner. We care about reproductive justice, not in spite of our faith, but because of it. So let us take our faith with us to grapple with the real ethical complexities. It may not be your litmus test #1 issue. It may not grab your attention when you skim the headlines, but the struggle continues and it's real. Reproductive justice means having awareness and power to say yes to the sex that you want and no to the sex that you don't want. It's about women having resources to choose how and when they give birth. And it's about providing accurate and meaningful information, especially for young people. I believe we can make that happen. Amen.